Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for another session of our authors series, sponsored by the Friends of the Belmont Public Library. I'm Stephanie Cahoon and I'm co-president of the Friends. We're the nonprofit organization that provides funding for library programming and enhancements. Our membership begins at just $20, so if you would like to join us or donate, please follow the link that will be posted in the chat and that's on your screen right now. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our program host, Jenny Alschuler.
I'm so happy to see everybody here. Sanjena is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and is the author of the novel Gold Diggers, which was named one of the top 10 best books of 2021 by the Washington Post. Gold Diggers was also longlisted for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize, was chosen as an Amazon Best of 2021 pick, and a Good Morning America Buzz pick, and of many, many other accolades. Her award-winning short fiction has appeared in The Atlantic, Conjunctions, Boulevard, and also she has written a lot of nonfiction for The New Yorker, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, The Washington Post, Time, and many other publications. She is currently working on is going to be working on the television adaptation of Gold Diggers with Mindy Kaling's production company, Kaling International. She can let us know if she actually is doing that now or if that's going to be happening in the future. But really thrilled to see you here today. And I think you're going to start us off with a little reading from the book, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks to the Belmont Public Library for having me. And Jenny, thanks so much for doing this. I am going to read from just a little bit from chapter 1. The context, this is just a few pages in, but the narrator, Neil Narayan, is 15 years old, and he has just attended a spring fling dance at his high school. As with all high school dances, things got a little messy, and Neil got in trouble, his sister got in trouble, and there's some fallout to deal with at his house. I sat at the dinner table one evening the following week, poking my white rice and yellow dal around with my fork, listening as my sister Prachi stood in the kitchen and called our grandmother to issue a formal apology with regards to the necklace she had lost. Nani! Prachi over-articulated, glancing pleadingly at our mother, who had mandated the call. She wound her fingers through the cream-colored curlicue phone cord. Nani, it's Prachi. Can you put your hearing aid in? I looked up to see my father poking his food around just like I was. My mother furiously scrubbed the white Formica countertop, which was irrevocably stained with splatters of hot oil and masalas, and glowered at Prachi. In our house, it took only one gesture in the direction of India to compound an already grave situation. The accusation was that Prachi had flouted her responsibility as a daughter, a sister, a former spring fling princess, and yes, a granddaughter too. She had imperiled the very nature of the sacrifice of crossing oceans. My parents relished that phrase, crossing oceans, as though they had arrived in steerage class aboard a steamship, instead of by 747, carrying 2 massive black suitcases with pink ribbons tied around the handles and the surname Narayan written in blocky letters and masking tape along the side. My father, miffed, gestured at the 2 empty plates on my mother's Walmart imitation Indian paisley print placemats. The rice and dal and reheated aloo sabji were all growing cold. I reached for some potato, but my father shook his head, and I got the sense that poking food around was the way we were going to ride this out, so back I went to that. The necklace just got lost at a dance, Nani, Prachi was saying. It was a very bad mistake, and I'm really sorry about it. I could picture widowed Nani on the other end of the line in Mysore, her long graying hair pinned against the nape of her neck, puzzled, perhaps unable even to remember what had been lost. Thinking, why are you calling me about a lost necklace when bigger things were lost in the move to America? Prachi signed off. Love you, Nani. See you soon. No, I don't know when, but soon, right? We could now start dinner, which had gone completely cold. Heroically, Prachi began to talk about the summer's beauty pageant as she heated everyone's plates. My sister planned to be Miss Teen India, Georgia, and then Miss Teen India, Southeastern region, and then Miss Teen India, USA. Prachi truly believed she was on her way to solving the riddle at the heart of the pageant. What does it mean to be both Indian and, American? One more shot at the tiara and she'd have the answer at last. She would communicate all this and what it signified thematically and emotionally on the Duke application she was to spend the summer filling out. Who's Miss Teen India, India? I inquired. She glared. The point is to empower Indian girls in America. Incidentally, your girlfriend's going in for it too. My parents' eyebrows furrowed. They could not comprehend the utter impossibility of Prachi's accusation that I, at 5'5", as brown as me, could have a girlfriend. Who? I said, my fist tightened around my fork. Anita Dayal, Prachi sniffed. She's trying for MTI too. Not that she's ever been interested in exploring Indian American identity before. She's not my girlfriend, I said, feeling a revolting feminine blush beneath my skin. We're barely friends anymore. What happened? This was my mother, surveying Prachi and me. She's a little climber, Prachi said, accounting for my silence. And my mother said, forgetting her anger for a moment, just like her mother. My father remained stoic the rest of the meal, but my mother thawed. That banter reunited the Narayan women. Gossip is to my mother what South Indian classical music is to my father, the virtuosic amalgamation of years of a community's becoming. For as long as I can remember, she has been a connoisseur of gossip, of the sounds it makes, the musicality, the overall gestalt, which is one that causes her to use the pronouns us and them, and the phrases these people and our people and such people with confidence. One might call her ears, which are extremely large and loose-lobed with openings to the ear canal the size of a thumbnail, the place where the Indian immigrant public sphere gathers. In between wax and bristly dark hairs, the diaspora unscatters and lodges itself in my mother's oversized hearing organs.
Thank you. So funny listening to that. This is where I wasn't thinking of starting here, but one thing I think about this book is that every age, from teenagers to adults could read this book or listen to this book. And so you have the teenagers talking, that's like throughout the book. It really, do you view it as that it's really, one of those, like just sort of from adolescence up, that's who it would be for, which most adult books I feel like are not, where you could say to a 14 or 15-year-old kid, why don't you read this? What do you think? Do you think it's fine? It's good for them too?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't read just young adult fiction when I was a teenager. I grew up certainly enjoying some great YA, but the books that really shaped me as a teenager were firmly literary adult fiction that often had teenagers in it. And now we have this way of sort of separating it and saying that's for teens, that's for adults.
Right.
But Holden Caulfield is one of the great narrators in American literature.
Because this book, I feel like a lot of adult books do not have so often have teenagers in them. Obviously they do grow up in this book and they're adults, but like in the first half of the book, it's fun to, as an adult, to read about the teenagers, but I was thinking that teenagers would actually really love, enjoy this book too, I think. Have you found that people have written to you like that?
Yeah. It's really, one thing that's different about the way people, I think, talk about young adult fiction now is a friend of mine who does write some YA was telling me that often she thinks of young adult fiction for teenagers as aspirational, like it's there to sort of give them a sense of what they can be and how they can and should potentially behave. And sort of traditionally adult fiction doesn't do that. My fiction is very interested in misbehavior and is not aspirational. These characters get into a lot of trouble. So I love when young people are reading it, but I wouldn't offer it as a handbook to anyone.
Right, and I wasn't saying in any way that it was YA, because it isn't. It's an adult book, but it was just that I was thinking, younger people could actually find a way in. But as you said, reading everything is what a lot of writers do when they were young. So did you always want to be a writer? Was that something? Yeah,
basically as long as I can remember. Yeah, I grew up on these children's novels by Enid Blyton, the English writer. Yeah. I think a lot of like kids from post-colonial backgrounds grow up reading her novels. They're set in British boarding schools. They're little mystery novels, and my first writing was Enid Blyton fan fiction.
And so this story, how did you come to write this story?
Yeah, I had been trying to write something set in the Atlanta suburbs through college, through my early 20s, and it sort of wasn't holding together, both because I think like craft wise, I wasn't good enough yet. I didn't know how to sort of marshal language, and I didn't understand plot or structure. But I also hadn't figured out my voice. I didn't know how I should really sound on the page. And the way I kind of found my voice was by starting to write magical realism and doing more speculative fiction, where I was playing with reality. And I got a sense of like how to play on the page, from basically messing with reality and writing non-realist fiction. And so I ended up coming back to some old stuff I was interested in about the Atlanta suburbs, which are these, which is where the first half of the novel takes place. Yeah. And these are like deeply unsexy places, like it's strip malls and it's highways. And I knew that there was like a story that was sort of both comic and serious to be told in the suburbs, but I sort of needed to make it interesting enough to go back to. I didn't want to just be stuck back in the suburbs by writing the story sort of realistically. So I came up with this idea of people stealing gold from each other in the suburbs and performing a little magic on it. And that gave me like an exciting reason to return to the suburbs and to sort of transform them alchemically. And
what is your process? Like, do you outline? Do you just write, then see what you have? What's the process?
Yeah, I wish I knew. It would make working on future projects a lot easier. I had a wonderful professor in college named Ann Fadiman, who's
I love her.
She's just absolutely a genius, and she taught me a lot about craft. And one of and she's married to a writer, George Howe Colt, and she would tell us about their very different processes. She described herself as a diamond polisher, which means she can't move on from one sentence to the next until the first one is perfect. And she described George as a vomit drafter, as in he just goes and goes and goes and edits later. And the instant she described those two types of writers, I was like, I'm the vomit one. And so it's very undignified. I write probably thousands of pages. Most of them are horrendous. And I just have to spew and then go back and look at it again, and then spew and go back and look at it again, and just be okay with the fact that most of the drafts are really nasty, really ugly. And then I have to find the energy and sort of edit around the energy.
And for the gold that you have in there, I guess.
Well done.
Saying that, yeah. So how much more would you say you wrote of the book? Like double the amount, or? I mean, I feel like that's a great way to write. I actually think that is, I love that way of writing.
I mean,
just edit and cut things and see what you have.
Yeah, it would be almost impossible to count how much more I'd write.
As you go, you're just deleting or editing. And,
yeah,
the next day. Yeah. Yeah,
I threw away an entire sort of novella in the middle that was probably 100 pages. The version of it that my friends read that I thought was a final draft was 120,000 words. And then the version that is the book today is 94,000 words. Wow. That was just like editing. That wasn't even me drafting and redrafting. That was just
even that. I was going to talk about this later, and I will, but the TV adaptation, are there things that you threw away that, or maybe saved, that you would be able to put into the TV production because there's no time?
Yeah, the thing that's really fun about the TV adaptation so far, and we're in really early stages, we have to pitch it to networks, so we still need a network to come on, but we're just working on adapting the story right now, stage one. The book is in first person, as you all heard, so it's told from Neil's perspective, and I had written a lot from his best friend Anita's perspective, who you got a little glimmer of in there, and her mom, Anjali, who is the sort of mastermind behind these gold thefts that Neil and Anita start to take on. I had written quite a lot from their perspectives, and now we get to develop them as characters who kind of drive their own plots with the series. Yeah.
So you went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. So where was the book written after that, or was it written there? Where does that fit in with your training there? The book,
it all came together at Iowa. I had thrown away basically a full kind of attempt, maybe 2 attempts at a novel set in the suburbs well before going to Iowa, and then arrived with sort of a clean slate. I was writing short stories. I wrote a short story in the first semester that was actually from a kind of adult Anita's perspective about, she was remembering her mother who had sort of pushed her into stealing gold when she was a child. And it was this creative kind of take on tiger parenting that I was like, oh, what would it be if this like Indian tiger mom made her daughter steal gold and drink it to steal her classmates' ambitions? Oh, that's interesting. Like that conceit was all there.
Yeah.
But Anita was the wrong narrator, and it was in the wrong form. It was sort of a failed short story. But from there, I spent the next 18 months turning it into a novel. Yeah, so I wrote the whole thing at Iowa.
So how did you come to have Neil as the narrator?
I don't totally know what it says about me that I was more myself writing from the perspective of a 15-year-old teenage boy than the young, dignified South Asian woman who is the other option here. But Neil, I think he's really flawed. He's really messy. He's really snarky and sarcastic. And he sits at this, he basically straddles the border between sort of like partly belonging to his community and also having real objections to the values that the community takes. And when I found his voice as this sort of like smart but grouchy, and also he's got this like slacker sort of slacker wisdom almost. I could tell he was going to be versatile and let me go to places that the other characters just couldn't go.
When you say found his voice, you started writing and like just tried it out. Is that how you came to that? Like you just try it from his point of view?
Yeah, I think the first scene I wrote from his perspective appears in like a paragraph midway through the book, but it was a scene of him getting dumped by this girl he was kind of seeing. And I just thought he was funny and sort of undignified. And I thought that would be just a good head to be in for hundreds of pages.
It must have been fun because he's very charming and interesting and funny, as you said. How much of you is like in the characters, would you say, of the, I mean, you said like, you know, enjoyed writing him, but do you feel, I know people ask you that, like what part, where do you stand?
Yeah. I think that most fiction, whether writers admit it or not, is this mix between autobiography and artifice, like between self and non-self. And I think most of the characters who I am close to in the book, anyone who I've been able to write about successfully, they have some little bit of me in them, but they can't all be the same, right? So I have to choose like this bit of me goes here, and then I'm going to blend it with those three people who I think about, and then it becomes like that person becomes their own person. So I kind of split, I think, the two biggest parts of me into Neil and Anita. So Neil is, I think, sort of the more fun and snarky version of me, but he's also much more of an underachiever. And Anita is the ambitious, has it together side of me, and putting them in conversation with each other.
That's fun.
How the book
came out. I pulled out a quote. So Neil says at one point, "I wish everyone would just give up on me. Their gazes were too forceful. Their hopes for me too enormous." And I thought that was like a really important, I mean, it's just funny too, though. I wish everyone would just give up on me. So, I mean, I know it's sort of about ambition, and where does he stand on that, would you say?
Yeah, I think that Neil really bristles against this idea that the parents in their community, in this kind of very tight-knit, claustrophobic, competitive Asian American enclave in the suburbs of Atlanta, all these parents are obsessed with their kids doing as well as possible, in part because they love them and they want them to be safe and happy in this new country, but also because there's this sense that like, we came to this country, so you kind of have to like give us our money's worth. And
kids didn't ask, but they came for them anyway.
Yeah. And Neil is really skeptical of that, both because he's like lazy and would rather play video games. And as he gets older, he starts to have a more mature critique of it, of those sets of values, which are maybe we don't need to sort of assimilate our way so hardcore into the mainstream if there are real costs to assimilation. And the book is, as you say, like an exploration of ambition as the only road to assimilation. The
other thing I wanted to talk to you about was place, the importance of place in the novel, because you have 3 different places. Will you talk about those? Or
Sure. Yeah. So the 3 main settings are 3 places that I've spent a lot of time living in. Atlanta, where I grew up and where I now live again. The Bay Area, where I lived right after college. So sort of the San Francisco and the Silicon Valley part of the Bay Area, the kind of tech boom era. And then Bombay, now Mumbai, which is where I lived for a little while. And I have some family who had spent formative years of their lives there. And the book tries to sort of thread several generations through each of those places. And I needed to have a lens to look at each of those places so it wouldn't get unwieldy. And the lens is gold. What does gold mean in 1980s Bombay? It's certain characters are sort of placing all of their hopes on trying to get to America. What does gold mean and what does ambition mean in the American suburbs? It's these little talismans that people hold in their jewelry boxes. And then when I put California in the mix, it's so literally rich. It's the gold rush. And then writing about the tech boom a little bit is full of gold rush metaphors. So I was just thinking about kind of wealth, ambition, and gold in each of those 3 settings.
wow, you really, there's perfect places and perfect topic to. Are there other books about where gold? I mean, aside from like a nonfiction book, it's not something I've thought about before. Gold in such a strong way like that. I mean, had you thought about it a lot before, or is it just it popped in that this would be the thing?
It popped in a little bit because so the novel is about, it begins with these gold thefts in the Atlanta suburbs perpetrated by Anjali, the sort of helicopter mom, and then Neil and Anita, these teenagers under her care. And that actually came about because there really were a series of gold thefts in the Atlanta suburbs where I grew up. And eventually, I think it took a long time to make arrests because to some degree, they were breaking into Indian Americans' houses. They knew that there was gold in these homes. They knew that a lot of Indians were not securing their gold in safes, and that it was kind of just out there for the taking. So like a clever thief could pop in and get maybe $1,000, $5,000 worth of gold. Eventually these arrests were made, and there was like an organized crime ring of people who were not Indian. But my mom, during the years when this was going on, she was always like, it's people inside the community. Someone Indian is involved. If they're not the ones actually doing the thefts, like they are tipping someone off, because how else would, like, non-Indians wouldn't know all of these little tips and tricks for how to figure out where the gold is going to be hidden in a given house. So I was interested in my mom's theory that this was actually unlikely Indian gold thieves stealing from each other.
Wow. I wanted to mention the way you wrote it. So there's a lot of Indian words that we wouldn't know, but they're just in the mix of it. And I heard you talk about it, but I wanted to hear, why they're just sort of in there. There's no glossary. There's nothing to explain it. Why you did it.
I mean, I think some of it is like trusting the reader and knowing that if you don't know what it is, you'll figure it out by context. It's not that hard. I'm not fluent in any of the languages that I pulled from, so I'm also not using anything that's that hard. I don't have a super deep knowledge, but I did at one point italicize sort of foreign words in my writing because it was how I'd seen other books printed. And on my first day in workshop in grad school, a Native American woman, she's Northern Cheyenne, she looked at one of my stories and she was like, "Why did you italicize these words? Like, no one in your story thinks they should be italicized. They're not different to the people in your story. Like that, you're breaking sort of the spell."
Breaking the fourth wall to tell us that it's
exactly. And I felt sort of embarrassed that I had never thought about it in those terms before. And I was like, absolutely, I shouldn't be doing this. And so it helps me enter the world of the story more fully. And I hope it helps the reader do the same.
No, that was interesting because I wanted to thank you for telling, everyone that's here, because I realize now we'll see that when people italicize it and we'll be like, well, no, they shouldn't be doing that. We can figure it out or look it up, especially nowadays.
Not that hard.
Anything. So that was interesting. Oh, so sort of on the same vein, so you've written about Jhumpa Lahiri. How do you feel about her versus, you know, in her writing and what you're able to do now and what she did, kind of?
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, Jhumpa Lahiri was the only Indian American writer I had heard of, and I think the only Indian American writer that most people had heard of. And we're over 20 years past The Interpreter of Maladies, her first book that came out, and I still think that she is the person that people think of when they think of Indian American writers. And I was very grateful to be given like The Namesake, which is actually a novel that I do like. When I was in high school, I liked the book, but I also felt like I was handed her work as if to say, like, here, you exist in these pages. Like, aren't you so glad to be represented? And while some of the sort of like material elements of our work like deals with the same territory, like I read you all a scene at a family dinner table. You've got 4 people, some of them new immigrants. Like that is material that Lahiri was also interested in before her move to Italy. But I think tonally, I'm a very different writer, and it's partially that I became much more interested in kind of comic and irreverent writers. On my shelf behind me, I have like Franzen and Roth and Hanif Qureshi and people who are a little bit ruder than the sort of extremely mannered prose of Jhumpa Lahiri. And I think one of the things I think about when I think about her continued predominance in Indian American letters is just this idea that like we have to wonder, do we prefer people who are well-mannered? Do we prefer people who write relatively polite fiction that respects its elders and doesn't make the reader or the people from that community feel uncomfortable? Or do we have space for a sort of more capacious tradition? And that essay you mentioned, I talk a lot about Toni Morrison. I talk a lot about Roth. These are people who were not afraid to put the sort of the parts of their community that even people in their community didn't want them to talk about. Right. I think that's what makes them so good.
Yeah, no, you were comparing. There were a lot of articles I read where there was a discussion of Philip Roth and your work, and that the people in the community might say it's not so great, but you should be free to, any person is free to write what they want to write about it. And he said, there was a quote from him in your essay, I think, where he said, you had him, you know, where he said like, oh, wow, they're going to find out that we are human. Like if we tell them, it's not like there's some secret that something that nobody else would ever do. It's just like, we'll just be human on the pages. That's all it is.
Absolutely.
But that essay was amazing. I really found that interesting. I'll put it in the chat, or we'll put it out. It was just very interesting for me to think about. So let me see, actually, do we have, let's see. Here's a question. Let's see, wait, but let me just go to the top here. So other writers have commented on the culture of Iowa City as an inspiring one of a kind that's very conducive to writing. Did you find that to be true in writing this book, especially as a quasi small town? So you were actually in a fourth space, very different than Atlanta, you know, the other 2 spaces. So how did that feel for you to be doing it there?
Yeah, Iowa City is Iowa is a very interesting state. I didn't realize I moved there from Bombay, which is a city of 21 million. Everyone packed. Oh my God. Jowl. And then I moved to Iowa, where I didn't know that only 3 million people live in the entire state of Iowa. Wow. It was very quiet. And the quiet was very conducive to getting work done. The town is cute and idyllic, and the workshop is obviously very storied. But for me, probably the most important thing was having a community of writers. And I lived with a poet and a novelist who is a Brookline born and raised, Andrew Ridker. Everyone should read his novel, The Altruists. And they became kind of my key interlocutors on all of my work, and I maintain a relationship with them now, and they are sort of like my artistic soulmates.
That's amazing.
That's what can happen in a really tight-knit place like Iowa City. I wouldn't have met people like that otherwise.
Wow. Susan Wagner, would you like to ask your question? It's long, but I assume you'd be happy to ask it.
I'm happy to ask it. I just love your irreverence. I'm cracking up from, especially the moms. And it's applicable to all moms.
Yes,
in a lot of ways. even unintentionally sometimes, or often
Oh,
unintentionally.
one of the funniest things I read today when I reread it was she was talking about the kids who are doing terrible things, and she, things like drinking or whatever, and things like that. And this is, or not taking AP Bio. And that was a discussion in our house. You have to take it and all that, or not, one didn't. And it's like, you should have, Barry still says, you should have done it. You could have done it. But so that was really funny to say that's like one of the crimes that kids could do, is not take AP Bio.
It really makes us a little older moms sort of reflect on things we said and we prioritized, and all from good places. But I could see how Jenny started with the 14-year-old's perspective on it all. So it was very
fun to have everyone's perspective. Yeah, but you put the older generation, well, you're sort of making fun of them, but it is, what we do. So okay.
Yes. But my question, and I've read so many novels with this type of character, and also movies. So there's always the character who is the Neil, like they're likable, the kids don't find him threatening, he's the girl likes him, the mom likes him, adults like him, but he's sort of the underachiever. You're not sure if it's out of laziness or he just doesn't have confidence. But then you, as the reader or the viewer, get frustrated with this character because you think that they could do more, and that they don't even realize how their natural gifts are serving them so well that everybody kind of is rooting for them. And I'm just wondering if there's a term of art for that type of character, because they seem to pop up in so much literature and so many cultural things.
Yeah. I mean, I always think of that as like the everyman or the every person. I also think that like literature bleeds into itself, and what you're describing is I think it's a very specific like first person American novel phenomenon. So I think of like Holden Caulfield as that, Nick Carraway and Gatsby as that. Huckton has a bit of that in there. And I was being extremely like sort of consciously evoking those in the tradition of like a brown boy instead of,
Right.
one of these older American novels. But I think that's a deeply American, like everyman character for sure.
But why is it considered everyman? Because it's sort of antithetical to, the American more aggressive. So that's why I always look at it as not such like,
Right.
authors use that character, but they use it a lot, but
Right.
it's not necessarily so American.
Although the books she just listed are quintessential American.
I know. That's true.
Think how writers are. I think we all always feel like we're both insider and outsider. And so a character like this is like, they serve as sort of a handy vehicle for letting us explore a new world while also commenting on that world. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Thank you.
For the question, Susan. There's another question. Are you a disciplined writer, or do you write wherever you're able? Like, do you have routine, I guess, or can you just do it like anywhere?
Yeah, I'm really picky. I wasn't picky for a long time, and then this house I lived in Iowa had an attic that I laid claim to as my study, and it was the first time I'd had a study with Stephen King says the thing you need is a door that closes. You don't need anything else. And it was the first time I'd had a door that closed, the proverbial room of one's own. And since then, I have become really picky about, I need a space that is separated from the rest of the house. It doesn't have to be like a big dramatic separation, but I need to sort of step over the threshold into my workspace. Other people aren't allowed to talk to me when I'm in the workspace. Which can feel a little diva-ish, but I think that like writing is so often treated, and art in general is often treated as like a hobby and not like serious work. And so sometimes just have to like force yourself to take it really seriously. And I try to write first thing in the morning until I get hungry, break for lunch, and then come back and do more editing or research or like reading something that is going to be in conversation with my work. And then I do other stuff in the afternoon. So I try to have a routine.
Wow. Does anyone, I have some more questions, but does anyone else have a question? They can unmute or just put it in the chat if anyone wants to. Just feel
I think
free.
we have a bunch of chat questions. Yeah.
I don't think there's any more in the chat, but let's see. What were you like? What were you? You've mentioned a lot of things, but when you were growing up, or in your 20s, or you are maybe in your 20s still, but like, what have you been reading? Like, what are just? I'm sure there's a lot of books that you've referenced and thought about. And
Yeah.
since I love literature and books so much. I'd just like to hear what you're reading now or what you have loved.
Yeah, this shelf here, I have my library divided into, I have novels and nonfiction, plays and poetry on one side, and then these are short stories. And this is just
Wow.
favorite books shelf.
Oh, what's there? Tell us.
On there we have The Bell Jar, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Midnight's Children, Invisible Man, The Sellout by Paul Beatty, The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, The Sympathizer. These are sort of the books that made me. Let's say Beloved's on there, The Bluest Eye, and then the aforementioned Roth. There's like 3 Roths on there.
Which ones?
I've got, here I have the Ghost.
If they're your favorites, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, here I have the Ghostwriter and American Pastoral. And I think I have Goodbye Columbus right over my head, somewhere there. Yes.
Nice to have all, you don't want to Marie Kondo that. I feel like you want to have, I like also having all the books around, even if I won't be reading them again. I just like seeing them or having them, or if you're talking to someone, you could say, oh, take this. It's really good. Someone asked, what are you writing next? What's your next time?
I'm working on the TV adaptation, and I am under contract for my next book, but I'm very superstitious and I don't talk about it in progress.
I don't blame you. Did you talk, so this one, did you do the same? Was it a surprise to people what you were writing about?
I talked to like my art friends about it. But if I was like on a bad Tinder date, I was not going to talk about it, you know. It's partially it's just because other people can mess it up, but also because it can change. And if you tell someone this is what I'm working on, and then it changes, like I think that I have this like battle of being like, well, I told someone it's that, so it must be that. So I have to keep.
That makes sense, right? Because they're affecting you if you talk about it, even if they seem bored while you're telling, or not, or very interested, but maybe that's not the way you should be going. You know, if they're laughing and but actually a better editor would say, you know, that's not the right direction. So that's interesting. Yeah, no, someone else had just said, congratulations on working with Mindy. Have you met her and talked to her about this?
Yeah, I'm way down on the totem pole of people who she needs to hang out with.
Will she be writing it with you, or I mean, like, will she be in the writer's room? I mean, like,
she will be in the writer's room if we get to make it into a show.
I know she's a writer, so
yeah, I think that's why I was so excited to work with her. Is that her background is writing, you know, she's and now as a producer, she's choosing so many different kinds of projects that expand kind of what like South Asian storytelling can look like. It doesn't all look like one thing under her anymore. Yeah, but I'm co-writing with a woman who is a wonderful screenwriter who worked on Little Fires Everywhere and a few other. She's super experienced, and so she and I are co-writers. And if we get to make it into a show, we'll have a writer's room, and Mindy would be in the writer's room. Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if you then became someone who did both of those, or wrote. But you know, there are other writers we can think of who did that, wrote the books, and then I'm adept at writing the screenplays. Yeah,
we're in a cool period of time around television. I've been watching the Station 11 adaptation, which is, I think, an amazing example of when like a book can be so successful as its own object, and then the show is just an amazing adaptation. And yeah, we're in an exciting moment.
And it's fun now that it's on on a multi-episode thing, because they don't have, I feel like when people, a lot of movies, I always feel like I never want to watch this movie of this book that I love, because they're going to cut everything, they're going to change everything. But now when they can have 6 or 8 or 10 or go on, episodes, they can really put it in a smart way.
Yeah.
Actually, I just watched Made. Did you watch that?
I haven't.
Read the book of that like 4 years ago, and then they added a lot, but they really, they had 10 episodes, and it was so slow in a good way. Like they just had so much room, I guess I would call it.
Yeah.
They could show you the time passing and how hard things were and how long it took, but better than the book. I mean, I read the book, so I'd have to compare. I want to read it again to compare it, but not better, but just you're actually watching 10 episodes. So you're really seeing it. That's all I mean, in long time, rather than expressing. So it's very fun, but I want to read that one again. And I'm sure after we watch your show, we'll want to read this book again just to see what did they do, what did she change. So I feel like, let's see. So Susan, are you anticipating having to protect some of your storylines? What did you mean by that?
Well, that was, you sort of were going there, but you know, you and I know an author whose book was changed into a series, and it was an unpleasant experience.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, they changed the whole story.
Right, exactly.
I think she was fine with it because she was fine with it, but she didn't get the ending.
It was no longer what. So I'm just curious, when you start doing this conversion, are there certain storylines that you are intent on protecting and are sort of, you know, the red line or the break point at which you'll say, this is the story I really want to be told, and I don't want you messing with some of this.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you're anticipating any of that.
I mean, I think there are always going to be like little negotiations. But part of the reason I chose this team that I did is we talked to, like, my literary agent and I talked to a few different people, and some people just had visions for it that was so different that I was able to sort of just be like, that would just be too far away. But I mean, the people I'm choosing to work with are people who I think trust the book as like the initial origin story. And I think I'm also very, like, I'm willing to learn about different things make like narratives pop on television versus on the page. Like the nature, for instance, of like Neil's sense of humor, it's like very narrative heavy on the page, and he's not always as funny in dialogue, and television lives in dialogue. So we're going to have to do some new imagining of that. So I think actually there's new stuff that we can do in addition. So I don't want to cling knowing that there's like exciting new invention to happen.
Because the one you're thinking about, that person sold it and didn't work on it. So I think it'll be different with you in the room, which sometimes also happens for other writers, but.
And I'm sure other people will, it probably makes it awkward when you're in the room. Someone is, well, I don't know why the writer did that. That was a terrible choice. Let's change it all.
No, the book is perfect as itself, but there may be things where they say, well, we know television, and I think you need to cut this or expand this or something. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'm looking forward to that. I think we've talked about a lot of topics, so I'm not sure we need to go more unless people have another question or. Is there something else you'd want to tell us, or should we just stop? Because I feel like we've had so many questions. You have so many great answers and sort of went through everything nice and in depth, actually. I do have a last question for this. What do you think the role of fiction is now in our society? Do people read? Do they not? Or is that too big to end?
I don't know. Sometimes I'm very optimistic about this. Sometimes I get really depressed because I think that people don't read as much as they used to. I don't know, there's so many working theories of this, right? Some people say fiction is like an empathy machine, and it lets you like hop into someone else's head and then all of a sudden feel empathy for them, and that expands your like ability to be a good person. I think that's a lot to put onto a book. I just think it's one of the only forms of art or entertainment that is like intimate, that's like really, really intimate. It's just one of the only ways that you can get really close to the weird and like impermissible parts of another person's psyche. And I think that's like worth protecting. I also think that sort of defensively, I don't think that art should have to have a purpose. And I think one of the scary things about this moment is people want to know like how to spend all of their time productively. And I think like spending any time on art is sort of like radically unproductive and probably good for that reason.
It is true about books that you're really in the person's head. Like you're never even with a person you're talking to, they can hold back, or a movie, you're outside, you're looking at them. So it is, a lot of other things. You're not in their head like you are. I was thinking about like the Rabbit books by John Updike. Like that's what he was so incredible. You're just in his head for 50 years.
Yeah.
And it's his head. It's like, whenever I tried to read some of it again, it was harder to read, but like, it's still, at the time when I first read it, it's still amazing to just put every thought that someone has in the mind of like how you would, it's just like an amazing experience.
Yeah.
To read
Yeah.
those.
if an alien came to Earth and needed to
Yes.
understand white American masculinity, you could hand them all of
That's
the
right. And the things that are hard to read, I was reading the second one, Rabbit Redux recently, but I didn't want to read it after I started reading it. But still, they would have, if the alien came down, they would still learn, they would still be valid as to what it was like. I didn't want to go through it again. But at the time when I first read it, I didn't notice as much just because of time. So anyway, thank you so much. Thank you. This was really fantastic.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who came to this, and we will send out to everyone who's here and also people who had signed up, maybe couldn't make it. We'll send out the link to this so you can share it with friends or watch again if there's something you wanted to hear again. So thank you very much. And we'll let you know when we have some more. We're going to have some new authors coming in the spring. We'll let you know what those are. So keep your eyes out. Thanks very much. Thanks to the Friends of the Library for sponsoring.
Thanks. Good
Bye.
night.